joining us. Thank you for taking time to protect democracy, kids, families, and all the things that are important. We really appreciate you being here and appreciate you putting your name and your city in the chat. Thank you so much. So thank you again to those who are just joining us right now. We're going to start in just a couple minutes, maybe a couple seconds. And we invite you to put your name and your city in the chat as we're getting to know each other as we all get into the Zoom, the Moms Rising Community Zoom. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to all who are just coming on. I'm repeating myself because I could see the number rising quickly. So we have a lot of new people coming on since I last said this. Thank you for being here. Please put your name and your city in the chat so we can get to know one another, and we will be starting shortly. Okay, it's 3 minutes after. We are going to start, you all, and we're going to start with something really important. I'd like to introduce our interpreter for the night, Felipe, to give us interpretation instructions. To you, Felipe.
Thank you very much, Kristen. Hello, good evening, everyone. Hola a todos, muy buenas noches. This is Felipe, your simultaneous interpreter, and I'm going to provide you instructions on how to connect to interpretation. Yo soy Felipe, su intérprete la noche de hoy, y les voy a dar instrucciones sobre cómo conectarse a la interpretación. In a couple of seconds, there will be a little sign on screen that says language interpretation available. When that happens, you will see an icon in the shape of a globe at the bottom of the screen. Simply click on it and click on English, and you will be able to hear a live interpretation or translation of everything that's spoken in Spanish into English. And if you're using a smartphone, you will find 3 dots that open more options at the end of your menu at the bottom of your screen. Tap on those 3 dots, tap on language interpretation, tap on English, and then tap on Done. For friendly reminder for those of you who are about to speak tonight, please do so at a moderate pace so that interpretation can remain high quality. And now I will give these instructions in Spanish. En unos segundos va a aparecer un letrero en la pantalla que dice Interpretación de idiomas disponible. Cuando eso pase, aparecerá un mundito en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Haga clic en él y selecciona español si quiere escuchar una interpretación o traducción en vivo y en directo de todo lo que se habla en inglés al español. Y si está utilizando un celular o una tablet, por favor, encuentre 3 puntos al final del menú, haga clic ahí, haga clic en interpretación de idiomas, haga clic en español y haga clic en listo. Se les pide a las personas que vayan a hablar que lo hagan a un paso moderado para que la interpretación pueda permanecer de alta calidad. We'll be monitoring the chat if you happen to have any questions. Estaremos monitoreando el chat si tiene alguna pregunta. That's it for me. Back to you, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe. And to everyone who's joined us, please put your name and your city in the chat if you haven't already so we can get to know each other. And now we have more helpful tips to get us started. Please also use the Q&A function for any questions along the way, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. We'll also be doing a follow-up email after this with many of the resources. Also, feel free to use the chat for any of the thoughts that may come up for you, the react button for any hearts and the claps and other feelings if you want to cheer people on. All of those things are open tonight. And I want to welcome you to the Moms Rising Community Zoom. I'm Kristen Rao-Finkbeiner. I'm Executive Director at Moms Rising, and I thank you for joining us. We always plan for these meetings to be about 1 hour, but sometimes we pack a lot of really important information into the program and we may run long. If we do, feel free to leave and then join us again, to just leave and join us next month or next week and do what is right for you. These meetings are always recorded, and you'll be able to go back in the recording to see what you might have missed and also just to review any part of the program. As we start, I just want to have a couple words with you because the news headlines are bleak, but something is really important, and that's that we together are hope in motion. That's you, that's me, that's us rising up and not giving up. That's us calling Congress, sharing our stories, and us persisting is exactly what's going to lift our nation up and out of the current chaos and mess that's being caused by those Republican leaders in Congress, Trump and his unelected co-president, Elon Musk. Make no mistake, the situation is urgent. We all know it. We all see the news. And while we're in this urgent moment, there are also so many signs of hope that we can't ignore. There was an unexpected win at the ballot box in Virginia this week. The polls are showing in Florida that the 2 open congressional seats are closer than anyone ever thought possible. The 2026 midterms are coming up fast, and we only need to win 3 seats to take back the House, and there are 15 seats within 5 points. The fact that the membership of Moms Rising is also a point of hope. The fact that we're growing quickly is the hope. And we are now over 1,151,000 active members strong who are taking quadruple the action rate of this time last year. That's us. And yes, when you do the math, 1 in 300 people in America are now active with Moms Rising. All of this is to say, you are not alone. A movement is growing. And no matter what chaos is being generated in our nation's capital, the power of us together can never be erased. In fact, each of us are needed more than ever. So we're doing regular community Zooms like tonight. We're launching new on-the-ground programs. We're going to Congress. And yes, I just flew back from Washington, D.C. to the other Washington State this afternoon. And we aren't stopping. Tonight, we have some important experts for you, some great conversations, some key actions you can take to make a difference, and some compassionate and powerful community that we can be together. So thank you again for being here, for taking time to be with us and in movement. And now I turn it to Monifa Bandele, who is the MC tonight. Thank you again to everyone, and thank you to the entire Moms Rising team for making this happen as well. Thank you. To you, Monifa.
Thank you so much. Everyone give a round of virtual applause to Kristen. Thank you for opening us up this weekend. We have so many things to talk about this evening. We have 4 amazing experts that are going to talk about all of the things that have been happening that I'm sure you're wondering, oh my God, how bad is it? How not bad is it? The attacks on the Department of Education. Federal funding cuts left and right, the firing of federal workers, attacks on life-saving health programs like Medicaid. What is really, really going on? So we have tonight Josh Bivens, Economic Policy Institute will be speaking. We have Chantel Hines from the Century Foundation. We have Joan Alker from the Georgetown Center for Children and Families. And for what you can do, we have an amazing action item from Sabrina Schulman from Run Vote Lead. But first, we're going to hear from Josh. And I just want to tell you a little bit about who Josh is and why we have him tonight. So Josh Bivens is the chief economist at the Economic Policy Institute. His areas of research include macroeconomics, inequality, social insurance, public investments, and the economics of globalization. Bivens has written extensively for both professional and public audiences, with his work appearing in peer-reviewed academic journals like the Journal for Economic Perspectives and edited volumes like the Handbook of the Political Economy of Financial Crisis from Oxford University, as well as well-known popular print outlets like USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. He's the author of Failure by Design, the story behind America's broken economy, and Everyone Wins Except for Most of Us, what economics really teaches us about globalization. And he's also the co-author of The State of Working America. I share all this about our experts so that you know that you are getting source information. You are getting people who have been working and studying in these fields, and not a lot of the misinfo and disinfo that we've been hearing day in and day out on the internet. So first, I welcome Josh Bivens to tell us about what's happening with the firing of federal workers.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here, circumstances aside. So I'm going to talk about basically the economic knock-on effects of, I'm going to call it efforts to throttle federal spending and capacity on the wider economy. Some of the numbers I will mention in this will be sort of bundled and links to resources in something that will be, I think, sent out in a follow-up email. So if you get curious about any of that, it'll be coming. Um, I'm afraid my main message so far is like, we know these knock-on effects are really bad for the economy in the short run and the long run. At the moment, we can't really provide a super sharp number on just how much they're going to drag on growth over like the next year. And right now, the reason why is everything's super murky. Like we don't even know how many people have really been laid off as of today by those Doge efforts. We're going to get a little bit of clarity next Friday when we're going to get a number that will tell us the change in federal payrolls over the month. When we looked in the February jobs data on those payrolls, you didn't really see any fingerprint at all of Doge at that point, which is good, even though we all know it's coming. So I'm going to say there's basically two parallel efforts going on to throttle lots of useful things that the federal government does. One is a legal effort, still terrible, but legal, and one is illegal. The legal effort is the budget working its way through Congress that just aims to extend the 2017 tax cuts that disproportionately help the richest while slashing social spending like Medicaid. Even though that slashing doesn't come close to paying for all the tax benefits to the very top. Joan will say a lot about the harms to people from the Medicaid cuts. I'm just going to say one sentence. It is a shocking upward redistribution of income in this budget. Basically, it is outright cuts to income for the bottom 40% of families in the United States and very large increases at the very top. And it turns out that matters for the knock-on economic effects that I'm talking about. If they do the full $2 trillion in cuts to social spending of all sorts of kinds that the House budget resolution calls for, this will drag a lot on economic growth over the coming year, and it will not be offset by any boost from the lower tax rates. And the reason why is simple. Basically, tax cuts go to rich households. Rich households tend to save most of every extra dollar they get. They can afford to save a lot of money. Their spending is not constrained. Poor, moderate income households, they do indeed cut back spending one for one as their disposable income is slashed, and this budget slashes their disposable income. So that's the sort of legal effort that is throttling federal resources, and it really will have pretty big effects on the economy if that budget passes as it's currently constructed. The illegal effort is all of the Doge efforts, which is bad in two ways, at least, but broadly, sort of a short run mechanical drag in terms of the economy, but also in a long run way on just the capacity of the federal government to do to provide the services and goods we need. So first, the sort of short run mechanical drag. One key piece of needed context here is just how small the federal government's workforce is relative to the overall labor market or relative to the size of government overall. Basically, the federal workforce is about 1.6% of the entire workforce in the economy. And the pay, including benefits, of all federal civilian employees accounts for less than 6% of total federal government spending. Basically, we have already cut to the bone in terms of the federal workforce that is needed to efficiently and effectively provide valuable goods and service, public goods and services, and administer programs like Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. But because we've cut to the bone already, and this workforce is already too small, you would need to lay off a absolutely shocking percentage of these workers for this to by itself cause something like a national recession. This is why the Medicaid cuts I talked about before, they have so much more heft. We spend a ton more on Medicaid alone than we do on the salaries of every single federal worker. And so that's, I think, one piece of needed context. Another piece of needed context is it's just hard to get firm data on how many workers have been laid off so far or how many contracts canceled. It'd be nice to rely on like Doge's wall of receipts, but it turns out they're sort of enumerate and can't do basic arithmetic. And so those sort of reports are totally unreliable. On the contract side, there's a very good resource that the Hamilton Project at the Brookings Institute tracks, which is real-time federal spending, literally day by day, comparing federal spending to what it was a year ago in the exact same day. And you can actually see some real stuff happening in that data. You definitely saw USAID get zeroed out, and then some money came trickling back in. In the aggregate, it's not that far off yet from what it was last year. So in terms of like the Doge effort to just, unilaterally cancel contracts, it is not adding up to a lot of sort of raw dollars at this point. It is doing extraordinary damage for every dollar in every program that is cut so far, but just in terms of adding up to sort of macroeconomic recession type questions, not yet. In terms of layoff tracking for federal workers, There's definitely been a sharp uptick in the pace of federal workers filing for unemployment insurance claims, which is one piece of preliminary data we can look at. That number is usually very low. So even with the uptick, it's still small relative to the broader labor market. Basically, I think there's been about 10,000, I'm going to call it excess federal UI claims since February. But in a normal month, there are 2 million people in the economy who get laid off. So that 10,000 is big relative to the historic path of the federal workforce. It's still not a huge number relative to the bigger labor market. I would say if you add up all the planned layoffs cited in the media, you get a pretty macroeconomically significant number. When I count all the media, like cut this from Pentagon, cut this from HHS, cut this, a number more like 400,000 workers. Um, but lots of those plans, maybe some of them won't even come to pass because of legal challenges. That would be my hope. And they're meant to be spread out over some period of time. I would say if the bad situation happens, they all come as planned and they all come over the next year, 400,000 jobs, call it over the next year. That would start to really matter for the macroeconomy. Basically, you lose 400,000 jobs over a normal year, the US economy is going to create on net about 2 million jobs. So that's a really big ding to the overall pace of growth there. Still not yet just that by itself recessionary, but it definitely is dragging on growth quite a bit. Obviously, I don't know how many people here live in the DC metro area. A local recession is kind of guaranteed at this point, just from unless the cuts are all completely reversed. But some useful context for the broader fight is that only about 25% of federal employees live in metro area DC. They are spread all over the country. At EPI, we have resources that tell you where they are by state, by congressional district. We can even tell you how many are veterans or the spouses of veterans in every state and congressional district. So those resources might be useful. I think one key uncertainty here is that the Federal Reserve does have some room to absorb some of these headwinds from all like the federal cuts. Where I land is I think if the budget passed and if those 400,000 jobs that are planned all happen in the next year, we would basically be on the very edge of a recession by the end of this year. And of course, those aren't the only headwinds. You also have tariff chaos and you have the threatened sort of mass deportations. If you add all of those things together, we're 100% on a path to a recession before the end of the year, absent a really sharp policy reversal. And then I'll just wrap up just saying one thing. This recession, if all these plans came to pass, would not buy us anything useful at all. It's just buying lower taxes for the very rich. And I just wanted to give 3 quick data points on sort of the long run damage from cuts to the federal workforce. One, there's been reporting IRS cuts alone threaten to have us lose 500 billion with a B in tax revenue this year. There is just great research. When IRS staff rises, they pay for themselves hundreds of times over in terms of better tax enforcement. When you cut the IRS, we lose hundreds of billions of dollars in tax collections. So that's incredibly inefficient. 2, research shows the primary reason why the US is bad at building infrastructure relative to other rich countries is that our public sector is too small. We rely too much on private sector consultants who do a lot of profiteering instead of having a really strong public sector internal capacity to direct infrastructure. And then finally, I think one of the most striking things, when workers leave the federal government for the private sector, they work fewer hours and they make more money. By this sort of private sector labor market test, the federal workforce is an absolute bargain. And so the idea that we're just going to try to shed a bunch of it over the next year is just crazy making. Just 2 sentences to end up. I would love to have firmer numbers for this. So much remains unresolved. We still don't quite know even the extent of the shock so far. It is entirely safe to say that the DOGE effort and the budget together will bring us to the absolute brink of a recession if they continue. And then if you add any other headwind, tariff chaos continues, deportations, the current policy path is absolutely a recession, and it will be one that will have engineered pretty much for no reason except to destroy some good public sector capacity and do tax cuts for the richest among us. And so I'll stop there and happy to hear everyone else's presentations.
Thank you so much, Josh. There's some really great questions for you in the Q&A. If you don't mind also clicking in there and giving some of your really good answers. I don't know about everyone out there. I'm fired up. I'm outraged, but I'm also ready to go. Thank you for laying that foundation for us. Another thing that we are outraged about is the attack on the Department of Education. Many of you out there, many of our million members have children in public schools. And we're very, very concerned about the gutting of the public education in this country, the impact it's going to have, especially on children who have 504 programs, IEPs. We've been getting your emails every day, members, and you want to know, what is this going to mean for you in your state? And also, what can we do about it? Well, our next speaker is an expert from the Century Foundation. Chantel is a fellow at the Century Foundation and a senior policy entrepreneur at Next 100. She's an education attorney turned policy researcher. Chantel's research and advocacy focuses on improving academic outcomes for students in the foster system. She draws on her experiences representing students and families. She seeks to see schools as a source of support, encouragement, and care for all students. Chantel is a 2022 Black Voices for Black Justice awardee. She's a 2025 Council of Urban Professionals cohort member, a Schoolhouse Connection board member, and a mentor through Connections Mentor. Chantel holds a BA in political science from Adelphi University, okay, New York, a JD from Benjamin J. Cardozo School of Law, and a master's degree from Dallas Theological Seminary. We are so honored to have you, Chantel Hines. We're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Manifa, and I'm so happy to be in community with everyone today. I am going to do my best to get through some serious information. My whole goal today is to share facts to help people understand what's on the line. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to be sharing a ton of resources and links in the chat so that you all can look at this information at a later date and really just learn more and increase your understanding. So really quickly, intro to the Department of Education. What does the Department of Education do? It does a couple of things. When we look at the K-12 side, it administers funding. So we're thinking of things like Title I funding for schools that have high percentages of low-income students. We're talking about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or special education funding. It administers Title III funding for English learners and Native American students. It administers funding for students experiencing homelessness, funding for students in rural schools, lots of funding to support our learners across the country. It also collects data to help understand and better improve education. It enforces federal civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination in programs or activities receiving federal funds. So we're talking about discrimination based on race, color, national origin, sex, gender, disability, and age. The gender piece has been a little different in this administration, but historically, that is another piece that they have worked on. It supports states and holds them accountable for educational outcomes and provides assistance to states about how to support students and how to follow the law. On the higher ed side, I know people have heard a lot about this. It also administers the student financial aid, loan, and grant programs, as well as various support programs for first gen college students, for low income college students, and things of that nature. A little bit about the history, because I think a lot that has been shared from the administration is not it's not fully contextualized, despite the ongoing conversation about the Department of Education being a new department. It has been around for over 150 years in some capacity. Just a few years after the Civil War, amidst the Reconstruction era, it was first created as an agency. Then a year later, it was sort of demoted to become the Office of Education and housed within other agencies. It's been in its current iteration since 1979 when President Jimmy Carter and Congress established the Department of Education. I want to note, though, something important that I think is to remember as we think about what's happening now is the department was first formed during Reconstruction, which is the era right after the end of the Civil War, where the nation is choosing how, if it will or if it won't, support newly freed enslaved Black folks, right? So we're talking about education in a context that has always been politicized and racialized. So that's important to remember as we think about what's happening and the things that are being taken away. Quickly on polling, there was recent polling by an organization called All for Ed, which found that a majority of all voters oppose eliminating the Department of Education. And I just want to say that just to set the table before we jump into the recent executive orders, because it really seems like what the administration is doing is at odds with what is happening, what the American voters are feeling, what we're all feeling. So to jump into the executive order, I'm going to talk about the main one that's dismantling the Department of Education, and then some other executive orders and actions just to be aware of. And then I'm going to just share some concerns that we have. There is not much that I can say about for sure, like this thing is happening or has happened, although we are hearing some early reports from states about challenges drawing down funding. But I want to share some broad concerns and why we should all be in contact with our legislators and pushing them to fix this issue. So some table setting, going back to elementary school, 3 branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. Legislative branch makes the laws, executive branch enforces the laws, judicial branch interprets the laws. Executive orders are written directives from the president to his agencies, his or her agencies, which are in the executive branch. They're about how to enforce the law. It comes from Article 2 of the Constitution, and it's all about how laws are faithfully executed. That's what the point of executive orders are. Executive orders, like I said, they have to do with enforcement or carrying out of laws. They don't create laws. Can a presidential administration misunderstand the law and how they are to enforce it? Yes, that's why we are where we are today. So you will see there have been and will continue to be legal challenges against these executive orders because they have exceeded the bounds of what the executive is able to do by law. So that's something to keep in mind. These EOs don't have the force of law and often will be challenged because they violate the law, either existing laws, they violate the Constitution, etc. The main executive order that we're here to talk about is the one entitled Improving Education Outcomes by Empowering Parents, States, and Communities. There are 2 main components of the order. I'm glossing over the background and fluff and just giving you the 2 things it really says. When it comes to higher ed, it basically says that it will return the bank function of managing the student loan portfolio to a quote entity equipped to serve students. That it mentions Wells Fargo, so maybe they're thinking about a bank. It's kind of unclear, but there's been recent reporting that the administration has been thinking of moving this student loan portfolio to the Small Business Administration, which definitely doesn't have the capacity to support this kind of work, as their workforce has been already cut by 40%. So that doesn't really make much sense to me, but that's what has been said. On the K-12 side, it's saying executive order says to the maximum extent appropriate and permitted by law, they will take all necessary steps to facilitate the closure of the Department of Education and return authority over education to the states and local communities. One note here: states and local communities already educate your children. There are not any federal decisions, curriculum decisions, things like that coming from the federal government. So this is a little bit untrue in terms of what they're purporting to do because it already is happening. If you have an issue with education for your child, you're going to your local school, you're going to your local school district, you're going up to your state education agency, by and large. So what do these things mean? So what does it all mean? The Department of Education can't be closed without an act of Congress because it was established by Congress, like I mentioned earlier, in 1979. However, and Josh mentioned this, things like the reduction in force, firings of education staff can have an effect of closing a department by rendering it unable to perform its functions. So even though the EO says they have to administer funding as required by law and they have to follow all the laws, how can you do it if you are ill-equipped to do it because you don't have enough staff to actually follow through the laws? So a little note on the reductions in forces that have happened. About half of the staff has been fired, retired, or resigned. And we're talking about a small group of people. So it's over 4,000 people. and about half of that group is now gone. Offices that have been eliminated or severely cut: education technology, Office of English Language Instruction, the data folks over at Ed. 7 out of the 12 regional civil rights offices have been closed. Remember, I said earlier, this department is couched in a racialized setting and politicized setting, right? So they're eliminating civil rights offices. The general counsel, the internal office that helps the staff carry out the laws and better understand the laws and the things they can do and the things they can't do, that has been severely cut. Student aid office folks have also been cut. Funding may be slower to get to states because of this. I hinted at this earlier. We are already getting reports, and there'll be links to some articles in the chat from New York City and California saying that funding, federal reimbursement funding, is being held up because there is not enough staff to process these requests. So we're going to start to see real effects of these staff cuts that go beyond, things that we have anticipated might happen. We're starting to see that they have happened for real. So other executive orders and things to know. One big thing we're also concerned about is the executive order expanding educational freedom and opportunity for families. And that one asked the Secretary of Education to issue guidance about how states can use formula funds. So those Title I funds for low-income schools, schools that serve low-income children, individuals with disabilities, homeless students, et cetera, how to use those funds to turn those into school voucher and education savings accounts for private school education. It's asking for a report from the Secretary of Education about how to use that. Some reporting has also noted that special education funding may move to HHS, which I just heard today also had significant cuts. So again, how are these different agencies going to administer this funding when they don't have the staff to do it? They also don't have the specialty and haven't worked with schools and things of that nature in order to do that work well. Another thing to be aware of is a Dear Colleague letter, which does not have the binding force of law or anything like that. It's mostly advising. But there was a Dear Colleague letter that was issued in February that issued by the Department of Education that really broadly interpreted the affirmative action case and applied it to early childhood, K-12, post-secondary institutions, and really is like driving home this anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion message and trying to apply it to public education. So that's something else we're watching. Why are we concerned about all of this stuff? One, if funding is shifted to the big concern around the private school funding is that if it's shifted to a more privatized approach, students in public schools will be harmed with insufficient funding, particularly when we look at things like plans to have no strings attached block grants going to states. That opens the can of worms exponentially to inequity for vulnerable student groups, like students with disabilities, like English learners, like students in rural communities, like low-income students, like Black and Brown students. Another concern is around students in special education. So those who are receiving services under IDA or Section 504, you often need advocacy, right? Like if your state is not doing the right thing, one course of action is to tell on them to the Federal Department of Education Office of Civil Rights so they can enforce the law for you. If we don't have the staff, like I said, 7 of 12 regional offices have been closed. How are you going to get those rights enforced if your state is not doing the thing that they're supposed to do? For states that have robust backstops and legal supports, families will need to turn to those options to ensure that their students and rights are being met. But in states where that doesn't exist or those systems are weak, we're going to be looking at civil rights violations for those young people. Loss of expertise at the federal level means states don't have anywhere to go if those people are not there to help them interpret and apply the law. So we really are concerned about that as well. Lastly, without a data shop, right? I mentioned all the data, basically all the data people were laid off. We're afraid we'll see more disparities, and we will experience, I should say, more disparities, but we may not necessarily be able to see them because the data collection is not happening in the same way. So we won't be able to address the issues of disparities, whether it's school discipline And we know those are Black and brown young people who are disproportionately experiencing disproportionate rates of school discipline, whether that's special education violations, whether that's over classification of special education and under classification in other cases. We won't be able to see a lot of those things. So that's a big concern. And the last thing I will say here, because I know my time is short, when we talk about the concerns around the privatization of the public education system, a couple of things to keep in mind. I don't want to ever take away for those families who have students with disabilities or who do not have schools in their communities that they feel are appropriately serving their children and have made the choice or need to make the choice to go into a private school setting. But when we talk about a wholesale dismantling of public education, we know that that is going to necessarily equal inequity where students who don't have access to good private schools in their area, where they're going to go when monies are siphoned off of the public education system and they're in public schools that are not well funded, that don't have the services that they need to support them, what's going to happen to those young people? So those are the different things that we're concerned about when we think about the privatization of our public education system, is what a wholesale dismantling does versus an individualized approach where it says this young person needs this, so they need a private setting. What to do about it? Reach out to your elected officials, tell them your concerns about the dismantling of the public education system. If you are a student, a parent of a student with a disability, tell your elected official why you're concerned about what might happen with the IDA, what might happen with your child services, how your child services will even be funded. Like I said, we're already seeing issues with funding coming through from the department right now. I believe New York City is reporting regarding COVID funding, but could be IDA related funding, could be other important sources of funding. Title I funding could start to slow. We need to make sure that those funds are flowing, that states have access to them, and that public education can be supported in a robust way. And our legislators need to push back on these issues that are arising. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Manifa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chantel. Please give her a lot of virtual love, a lot of applause. Chantel, please check out the Q&A function because questions were popping up. People are fired up, and you really touched on some personal experiences that people are having. And for everyone who's watching, remember, we're going to follow up with all of these links, and there'll also be a way to follow the work of all of our experts. So we've talked about the firing of federal workers, the attacks on public education and Department of Education. And as we know, our healthcare is also on the line. So next up, we have Joan Alker to talk about healthcare. She is the executive director and co-founder of the Center for Children and Families, CCF, and a research professor at Georgetown University McCourt School of Public Policy. She is a nationally recognized expert on Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP. All our members know we are fighting for CHIP all the time, and is the lead author of CCF's annual report on children's health care coverage trends. Alker has published in journals such as the JAMA and Healthcare Affairs and has written numerous reports, blogs, and other commentary on a wide range of issues, including Medicaid Section 1115 waivers, children and family health, the role of Medicaid in rural areas, and numerous reports on premium assistance for the Kaiser Family Foundation. Alker has testified before Congress, served on expert advisory panels to the federal government, and is a frequent speaker and commentator. She is routinely quoted in major national and state media outlets such as the New York Times, NPR, Political, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Joan holds a master's degree in philosophy on politics from St. Antony's College, Oxford University, and a bachelor's degree with honors in political science from Bryn Mawr College. Please follow her on her platforms. We'll drop that stuff in the chat, but I'll hand it over now to Joan. Thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks so much, Manifa. It's really great to be with you all and see all this great energy and folks from all around the country. And I am a research professor, so I've got some slides that I'm going to share with you. And I'm really here to talk to you tonight about Medicaid. And just very quickly, I will say we'll share some information about our resources. But the Center for Children and Families, as you heard, is based at Georgetown University. We're a nonpartisan center. We're trying to make public policy better and work for children and families to ensure they have access to high quality, affordable health care. And we don't accept any government funding, and we don't accept any corporate funding either. So let's go to our first slide. What you can see here, and this is, I call this my bubble slide, and I'm going to walk you through some of these bubbles. So as we all know, we just went through a presidential election campaign, and there was no discussion of Medicaid in that campaign. There was quite a bit of discussion about Medicare. There was discussion of the Affordable Care Act, but there was really not any discussion about Medicaid. And yet, as you can see from these bubbles, Medicaid and its sister program, the Children's Health Insurance Program, are by quite a big margin the largest source of health insurance that's supported by government funding. And you can see here with these bubbles, and just to talk about what does Medicaid do on our healthcare system? It does many, many things in our healthcare system. It's really the backbone of our healthcare system. And it is providing coverage to almost 1 in 4 Americans. And almost half of all children are covered by Medicaid. Medicaid is also the #1 payer for long-term care in our country. You can see here how the Medicare and the Medicaid bubbles are overlapping. Well, that's because Medicare doesn't cover long-term care, and Medicaid fills that gap. And Medicare and Medicaid is also covering the cost sharing for low-income seniors. So Medicaid is really making Medicare work in many important ways. Similarly, Medicaid is also supporting active duty military families. There are children who have serious disabilities, serious chronic conditions, and sometimes their private insurance isn't good enough to cover what they need. And TRICARE, which serves military families, is also sometimes, it doesn't have a very robust pediatric benefit. So Medicaid is providing wraparound coverage. So Medicaid is doing all of these important things, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. But unfortunately, despite the fact that Medicaid really wasn't discussed during the presidential campaign, Medicaid is now absolutely central and right at the heart of the debate here in Washington. In the budget resolution that Congress has moved forward and the House has moved forward, Medicaid was targeted for approximately $880 billion of cuts over 10 years. That is about 11% cut to the Medicaid program. It is by far the largest target for cuts in this budget. And as you heard up front, these Medicaid cuts are huge and would have very serious economic consequences if they happen. So let's go to the next slide. We have done a lot of looking at the different ways in which Medicaid is supporting communities. And here you can see here how vital Medicaid is for children. And our light blue box here, we took a look at every county across the country. And as important as Medicaid is in metropolitan areas, it's even more important for small towns and rural communities. And we know that rural communities struggle to access healthcare. They've had hospitals closing at faster rates. They've lost labor and delivery units. And families in these communities rely on Medicaid at higher rates, and these providers don't have a lot of fat. So if we see large cuts to Medicaid, then these rural communities will be especially hit hard by those cuts. We can go to the next slide. So you can see here, and we've got data, interactive data here on our website. You can look at Medicaid coverage by county for every county in the country, for children, for non-elderly adults, for seniors. And you can see here that, there are parts of the country that have higher reliance on Medicaid. One, for example, area, tribal populations, Medicaid is a really important source of coverage for Indigenous people because the Indian Health Service is a provider. It's not an insurance. So those are also communities that have a great deal at risk here. We can go to the next slide. So I mentioned up front how important Medicaid is really for the life cycle of families. And this is especially true for women. As we've talked about, Medicaid covers 40 to 50% of children. And as you can see here, Medicaid covers on average 41% of births in the United States. And that varies quite a bit by state. The states that are the darkest on this map have a higher proportion of births that are covered by Medicaid. We can go to the next slide. So this is a really, really critical point. And we've just heard a lot about education and how much education is at risk. Now, Medicaid funding is the largest source by far of federal funding that is going to states because states actually run the Medicaid program. And in your state, it might have a different name. For example, in California, it's called Medi-Cal. States often have different names, but states run the Medicaid program. They put up some of the dollars, and the federal government puts up the majority of dollars. So Medicaid, here you can see that if we have a large cut to Medicaid, that state budgets will be thrown into chaos. And I'll just give an example. There was an analysis done earlier this week by the Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF. And if you translate the amount of cuts that the House passed for Medicaid, states would have to cut their education budgets, and that's, the largest line item in state budgets is education. They would have to cut their budgets per pupil by just under 20% to get to make up for these draconian federal cuts. So there's a great deal at stake here for state budgets and for everything, all of the ways in which states are supporting kids and families with federal funding. So, and these cuts are so large that states will not have any choices. They won't have any good choices. And as we talked about, Medicaid is the largest payer for long-term care. And of course, we have an aging population. We're going to need more long-term care. So in the long run, these cuts will be even more devastating. So let's go to the next slide. Now, this is an area where the politicians are really out of step with the voters. And, when I made this slide, excuse me, what this slide is, this is a poll from January. And KFF asked voters of all parties, what do you want the new administration to do? What did you want the new Congress to do with respect to health care? And, there were about 10 things that came up, and I could only fit 5 on my slides. But you can see on the bottom here, reducing federal spending on Medicaid was literally the bottom of the list of these 10 things that voters want the federal government to do. It's only 15% of Republicans that want the federal government to cut Medicaid. This is hugely unpopular. So, and we've seen this in many, many polls. There was a poll about 4 to 6 weeks ago. 69% of Trump voters said, we don't want you to cut Medicaid. So this is not popular, and I would just underscore that there really is an effort to hide the ball on the Medicaid cuts, to frame them as just getting rid of fraud in the program. Nobody likes fraud, okay? But people who are enrolled in Medicaid are the victims of fraud. They are not the perpetrators. And if Congress wants to get rid of fraud, they should come up with some proposals like adding more personnel to the state fraud control units. Put back some of those prosecutors that they fired from the Department of Justice that have left the Department of Justice and put them on Medicare and Medicaid fraud. Go after fraud. These are not proposals to cut fraud. They're proposals to cut Medicaid. So this debate is really heating up right now. We can go to the next slide. I know we've put some resources in the chat. We have 50 state fact sheets for you. We have fact sheets specifically on children. A lot of our data is downloadable. We just updated our data on school districts and what percent of children in your school district, you can look up your county, are covered by Medicaid or CHIP, and that ranges from 5% to 95% in some school districts. We have Medicaid enrollment by congressional district. So we have lots of information there. And we have a very active blog that keeps folks updated in terms of what's going on in Congress. So with that, I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Joan. Just so much rich information. The Q&A is on fire. Please also, Chantal, there's a lot of questions for you in there. People really want to know how they can get informed and how they can get involved on their local level. There's some questions in the Q&A that I'll just kick out to the three of our panelists before we turn it over to Sabrina, because Sabrina's part is the take action part. This is a part where you can get fired up and figure out what you can do about it. It's a big, big ask, but that's how we do. We go big at Moms Rising. So I'm gonna pull a few things. I think, Josh, what we'll focus on is the last question. You actually answered it in the Q&A, but maybe some folks who in the general audience may like to hear the answer about tariffs was one of the questions that you answered in the Q&A. And I believe that the question was just, what about the impact of tariffs? And if you can answer that rapidly, then we'll move to one for Chantal, we'll move to one for Joan, and then we'll hand it over to Sabrina.
Sure, I think I can be quick. I mean, like I said in the Q&A, I think tariffs can be a useful policy on some occasions if they're used like strategically and narrowly for like really well-defined goals. That's kind of the opposite of what the Trump administration is doing. No one has any real idea what the goal is. They are not narrow and strategic. They are incredibly broad, historically high, and they're being pursued with kind of maximum chaos. Like I cannot ever recall in my life having like an intraday change in the tariff rate in the United States, and yet we've had that happen a couple of times. And that's, it's absolute death for businesses who are trying to make plans about where to invest. It is one of the things that is going to be a huge headwind to growth, because what rational manufacturer is going to spend more to expand capacity in the US if they have no idea, like if their imports are going to be 30% more expensive or 0% in the next week or so. And so it is a huge headwind. It is one of the many things in the whole ball of stuff leading us pretty quickly to recession if we don't reverse course.
Thank you so much. Chantal, one of the questions is actually three questions together. If you can answer rapid fire, what's something that, how can this impact special education? That's one of the questions in there. Like, what's an example of what harms this can do to students who are in special ed?
Oops. Hello?
I think you froze.
Oh, no. Okay. Am I okay now?
Yes, you're okay now.
Okay, good. So I think it's twofold. So I'm a former special education attorney, so I understand this field really well. And I think the first concern is this idea of block granting funding. So there are different ways that the federal government funds various things it wants to fund. Some are through formulas where they plug certain things in and they get a specific number that comes out, and that number goes to the states. It's based on a formula that they establish. There are discretionary grants or competitive grants or different ways that they can fund. A no strings attached block grant is a block of money that goes to a state to administer a certain program. An example of a block grant is the temporary assistance for needy families. And you all may have seen in recent years, there was a whole issue with, don't don't kill me because I don't remember the football player's name, but a football player got some kind of funding inappropriately, and that's because it was a no strings attached grant. So when we think about the idea of IDEA funding
Right.
going to states with no strings attached, there's nobody saying what you can and cannot do with that money. So how do we ensure, especially if we don't have a
Accountability. Mhm.
education department, how do we ensure that the students who need the funds are getting the funds,
Right.
that the teachers who need to be hired are getting hired? The other aspect is the enforcement. So again, when your state is not doing the right thing, when they are discriminating against your child, when your child is being suspended because they have a disability and they're not getting the right protections that they're supposed to get, who do you complain to if no one is there? Who can come and rescue you? There's a link in the chat that will, I assume, go out in an email that reviews all of the work that the Department of Ed's Office of Civil Rights has done from 2021 to 2025 that gives example after example of how they have enforced the law for students. So those are the two things that I'm most concerned about when I think about special education.
Thank you so much. And also, really quickly, Joan, thank you for your information. A lot of what this is going to do to families across the board, especially children. But there was a question in Q&A about Medicare Advantage and just the impact of cutting Medicaid would have on seniors.
Yeah, as I talked about, Medicaid is serving so many different folks among us, from birth to the end of life. And really, states don't have good choices here, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. States are going to be the ones who have to actually make the cuts, or they will have to raise taxes a lot. And of course, most states are talking about cutting taxes, not raising them. And states will have essentially three ways to make cuts. They will either have to cut eligibility, and certain groups that don't have a protected status in the law are more vulnerable to cuts. And that includes home and community-based services for seniors and people with disabilities. They will have to cut benefits, or they'll have to cut provider rates. And that I saw there was a question in the chat about, PT and speech therapy and OT. All of these services are, when providers aren't getting paid enough, then there's a shortage. And on that note, I don't think I mentioned, Medicaid is the #1 payer for behavioral health and substance use disorder treatment. And we have a real crisis in this country around behavioral health, especially for children and adolescents. And so these cuts to Medicaid, a lot of those services are delivered in schools, for adolescents. Schools are a key place. So these will have enormous ripple effects. Of course, we have a maternal health crisis, and Medicaid is the #1 payer there. So all of these issues that we want to address in our healthcare system, making cuts to Medicaid take us in exactly the wrong direction.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joan. Thank you, Chantel. Thank you, Josh. You have basically armed our members that are on this call by the hundreds with so much great information. And we're going to share this out to everyone who registered for the call. I don't want anyone to leave the call feeling despair, feeling apathy, feeling fatalistic, feeling like there's nothing we can do about this because there's just so much that we can. Kristen talked at the top of the meeting about calling, writing your representatives. We talked about sharing your stories. We talked about going to some of our local Mom Next Door programs, our fellows, our beacons, our hub leaders. There's so much activism that you can do on the ground, but you can also run for office. And Moms Rising has partnered with the amazing folks at Run Vote Lead to host a whole bunch of trainings to give you resources so that you can start to think about, I'm not happy about what I'm seeing done by the people I've elected to represent me. So why don't I be that person? Why don't I just go ahead and take that over? So we have Sabrina Shulman, who is currently the Chief Political Officer at Run Vote Lead and Run Vote Lead Action. Sabrina is an experienced political and advocacy strategist. As a mission-driven leader, she has spearheaded political and policy wins by threading together multi-layered campaign strategies such as lobbying, grassroots mobilization, traditional and digital media communications, and coalition development. At Brown and Winrob, Sabrina serves as a trusted advisor to clients across a broad spectrum of industries, managing complex relationships and initiatives with government officials. As vice president for the political and legislative affairs at NARAL, Pro-Choice New York, and the National Institute for Reproductive Health, she built the architecture of a multi-year strategy to elect a pro-choice majority to the New York State Senate and served as a leader in the campaign to pass New York's Reproductive Health Act. In Sabrina's early career at Planned Parenthood of New York City, she founded the organization's first permanent grassroots activist program and launched the organization into the political arena by establishing an affiliated 501c4 and political committee. I'm going to hand it over to Sabrina because now it's time for the inspiration.
Thanks, Monifa. I feel like we should hire you. You do this pitch better than I do. It is so inspiring and incredible to be here with all of you this evening, both the panelists and all the folks who have joined us to listen in tonight. And I do have some slides for you, nothing fancy, but then you can look at that in addition to me. As you heard from all of the folks who spoke earlier in the call, there's so many decisions being made at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level right now that we're all angry about, we're fired up about, we're calling our representatives about. And I know you all have been engaged for the last few months, and you're going to continue to engage with Moms Rising and probably other organizations to advocate in the future. My job tonight is to ask you to consider what it might look like if you were actually the person making those decisions. If you were sitting in a seat where you got to vote on your state education budget, you got to make critical decisions on a school board, if you got to decide whether there are school vouchers being funded by the state or whether more money is going into the public education system. You can move on to the next slide, thanks. For Vote Run Lead Action, what we're trying to build is a reflective democracy. And for us, it's not just about representation. The real core of a reflective democracy is that the folks making these decisions, the folks making the decisions that are critical to our lives, to our families, to our children, actually have the life experience to know the impact of those decisions on the diverse communities they represent. That there are moms sitting around those tables, that there are parents with young children, older children, that are people who've made reproductive health decisions for themselves, so that when bills come before them, when funding decisions come before them, we know that folks coming from all backgrounds and all experiences are weighing in on whether a policy makes sense for our city, our state, and our community. Which is why at Vote Run Lead Action, what we do is we train anti-racist, pro-democracy, intersectional feminist women and gender expansive folks to run for office. And crucially, we've expanded to also train folks to be campaign managers, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So at the top of the call, Kristen mentioned that despite what's going on in this country right now, there is hope all around. And I think that's really important because despite the devastation at the top of the ticket last November, what we also saw quietly down ballot was hundreds of Vote Run Lead Action candidates winning seats in city councils, in state legislatures. Women who are going to be that voice to say, Absolutely not are we going to divert funds away from public schools. Women who are going to stand up for voting rights, women who are going to stand up for access to birth control and abortion care. And these folks are positioned to make some of the critical decisions that are going to continue to come up in front of these bodies. So if we flip to the next slide, I will share a little bit about what our focus has been for the last few years. Our Run 51 program is a moonshot goal to get women's majorities in legislatures all across the country. And the reason we're focused on state legislatures is because, as I mentioned earlier, that continues to be the level of office where some of the most critical decisions are being made. They can't preempt federal law, but we do know, we've seen it both before the Trump administration and even after the Trump administration, during the first Trump administration, how states can be the place that fight back. If we get enough folks in state legislatures who share our values, they can protect some of those rights. They can decide where the funding goes, and they can create a wall of protection in the states that is going to make sure that we have the access to health care, that we have the access to education, we have the voting rights that we need. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you the other reason we're focused on state legislatures. In this country, women are 51% of the population, but hold only 33.5% of seats in state legislatures. And you can see on this map, there are some places where we're doing pretty well. One of the bright spots last November is that previous to November 5th, only one state in the country had a women's majority, and that was Nevada. In November, we added 2 more states to that column. So you can see New Mexico and Colorado tipped over the line to women's majorities, and we inched a few other states in the slightly darker purple closer to that threshold. And for us, it's not just about getting over the line of 51%. It's also about making sure that those women have allies and the support that they need once they get there to make the policy change. Next slide, please. So I don't want to scare anybody if you've never thought about running for office. I want to be clear that while we're focused on state legislatures as one of our core goals, we need women at every level of office, whether it's school board or county clerk, state legislature, city council, Congress, if that's your ambition, because as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about representation. We have data that women actually govern differently. The data shows that they tend to bring more money home to their districts for community projects. They pass more good bills that they fight for, and they're more likely to be transparent with their constituents in their community about how they're doing the business of government, what they're advocating for, where they stand on issues. Next slide. So here's the ask part. The solution to all of this is you on this call. And something that we always talk about at Vote Run Lead, our ethos is run as you are. I'll drop the link, or in a later slide, you'll see our national training is called the Run As You Are National Training. The reason we call our programming Run As You Are is because we firmly believe that you are already the leader that your community needs. We're going to train you, we're going to give you the tools, we're going to tell you how to build a campaign, how to hire your staff, how to fundraise, all that good stuff. But you are already the person your community needs to be better. You know your community best, you know the issues they care about, you know what the problems are, and you already have what it takes to step into the arena and win. Next slide. So that's what we're asking you to do. We are asking you to run as you are. You don't have to be something else. You don't have to turn into your vision of what a political candidate is. Every person who goes through our programs comes in with their values, with the issues they care about, with the thing that their community is struggling with the most. And what we do is help them turn that into a compelling message, into a values-driven campaign, and to learn how to get in it and win it, whatever the seat and whatever the race. Next slide. So now I'm curious. We're going to do a little chat poll. I want to see you drop it in the chat. Have you ever considered running for office, and how do you feel about it? Are you absolutely not, I'd never do it? Are you well, I've never thought about it, but maybe? Are you thinking about it? Oh, I see some yeses. That's always exciting to me. All right, I see some no's. I like the maybes. I'm down for maybes. Oh, I'm seeing a lot of yeses. This is very exciting to me. Okay, so let's flip to the next slide. The other thing I want to share is that, and this is for the no's and maybe it's for the maybes. As I mentioned earlier, in addition to training candidates, a few years ago, we also launched training for campaign managers. Because there is a role for everybody in changing our democracy and making it more reflective. Some people are ready to run for office, some people aren't, but maybe they want to dip a toe in and maybe they want to help support another woman to run or another values-driven candidate. And so all of our trainings now are both for candidates and also for campaign managers, because the other thing that we've heard a lot from our candidates is that they want a campaign manager who understands what it means to be a woman in the political arena, who understands what it means to be a woman of color or a queer woman or a new immigrant woman running. And so we are also building the pipeline of values-driven women campaign managers so that we are creating that pool of campaign staff for the candidates looking to run with values-aligned campaign managers. Next slide. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we're going to train you, but then we're not just going to send you out into the world and say, good luck. We have so many other programs that we can bring to help you through your whole political journey. We're going to train you. And then after that, we have one-on-one coaching with experts who have either run for office or run many campaigns. We have a national alumni network in Slack where you can ask questions, chat, build community with other folks jumping in as well. We have the VRL HQ, which is our digital resource hub. It's just vrlhq.org, where you can get all kinds of resources for building and running a campaign. And in 6 states, we also have staff on the ground who can handhold folks who are running and managing campaigns. So here's the call to action. Next slide. Oh, no, one more. So the last thing I wanted to say, and this is just a little bit of encouragement to say, you really don't have to do this alone. What we've seen over the years is that the more folks are engaged with our resources and our programming, the more likely they are to win. Look at the difference between that. 46% of women overall who win their campaigns. 68% of the folks who've gone through our training have won their campaigns. So I think the next slide is where I get to tell you how to get in. There you go. So the call to action, join us in Georgia. In just about a month, exactly a month, we're going to be in Georgia at our national training. And again, there's going to be 2 tracks, one for candidates, one for campaign managers. And a little bird told me that you can also switch and change your mind when you get there. We've had that happen. Some people register to be campaign managers and they show up and are inspired to jump in and do the candidate track. But we're going to give you 3 days of community tools to build your campaign, the confidence to do it whatever level you're at. And you're going to walk away feeling like you're ready to put your name on that ballot. So the QR code is here. I know they've dropped the link a couple times in the chat. The big thing I also want to say is that for all of our training programs, we have financial assistance available. Everybody who needs to be in that room should be in that room. We have scholarship registration fees. We have financial assistance available for travel, for the hotel. If you are interested in getting trained, please, please, please register and let us know what you need to be there. I have just one more slide that will pop up For folks who can't join us in Atlanta, or maybe you're just somewhere else in the country and Atlanta's not convenient for you, we are going to have 6 other trainings this year. I will also make sure I get this info to the Moms Rising team so they can drop this in the follow-up email. But we are going to have campaign manager and candidate trainings in the 5 states listed. And then we're actually going to have a campaign manager only training in Nevada in October. So I'm really hoping all of those yeses and maybes who were popping in the chat before are going to show up at one of these trainings this year, because I'm really excited to meet all of you.
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. You have questions also in the Q&A and in the chat. People are saying, where in Washington? All that. So feel free to go and answer some of that. Somebody in the chat, Kristen, said, well, if I can't run for office, what else can I do locally to take action? And I feel like that's a perfect tee up to you, Kristen, to talk about the other ways that we can take action around all the things that we've heard this evening.
Thank you so much. We're coming to the end of our time together tonight, but don't worry. We have many actions and many ways for you to get together with one another and take action next week, every day, all the time. So before we get to the actions, I want to give a round of applause to Sabrina, to all of our panelists, to the Moms Rising team, especially Catalina, Taylor, and Gloria, who are on with us tonight and who made tonight possible, as well as to Geronimo and Felipe, who are with us too. And also I want to give a giant round of applause to our fabulous, amazing, and spectacular MC, Monifa Bandele, who is the COO and Senior VP of Moms Rising. So let's give some hearts, let's give some love, let's give all of the happiness, because it is a lot to be on and to be active and to be engaged and be sharing expertise. So thank you to everybody, and thank you for making it happen. Now, as you may have guessed, I am the most outwardly appearing cheerful person who is actually furious inside about what's happening right now to our democracy and to our communities. I know many of you also share that inner fury about what's happening. And I know that fury for me fuels a lot of my drive for change. And so we're going to go into some of the ways that we together, just briefly, can drive change together, can put our fury to action, can put our anger to action. And the first one is, I've been sharing it in the chat as we've been going, to sign up, please, for the Moms Next Door local community engagement program. It's a really important program where we're giving a monthly dispatch with deep ways that you can get engaged locally. And then we have workshops online that you can come to workshop your ideas about how to get engaged with other members of the Moms Rising team who are long-term professional and knowledgeable organizers who have a lot of answers to your questions, but also so will other moms who are taking action locally. So it's a way to spread the word and exchange ideas. The second action is really important. Just breaking today. In fact, we just created this action hours ago, and it relates a lot to what we're talking about tonight. We're having a special community Zoom meeting to defend Medicaid. And breaking news just verbally with you all, we're going to have some U.S. senators on with us. We're going to have some storytellers. So it'll be a way to reach out to U.S. senators, share what you think in the chat, ask questions, get engaged, and help save Medicaid. We just heard from Joan today that Medicaid is seriously under threat. 80 million people have access to healthcare through Medicaid. We are here to stand up and fight back. We're here to use our fury to put it to action. And if you are feeling like we can't win ever, not ever, never, no way, I just want to remind people that because of you, me, and us, in Trump's first presidency, we were able to save the Affordable Care Act, even though Donald Trump said he would defeat it, even though the leadership in the House and the Senate, Republican leadership, said they would defeat it. We still won. We, meaning Moms Rising and many other organizations, came together, shared our stories, reached out to Congress. So please, please, please come to our special meeting to defend Medicaid next Thursday, same time. The next action is an April storybook delivery. Now, if you've clicked the link, you'll see that the window has closed for us to mail you a storybook, but you can still print one out, and we'll give you the way to print that out. and deliver it locally to your member of Congress in district. This is really important because you're being an ambassador to have people around the country's stories heard about really important issues that are on the chopping block. So you can sign up there. The last but not least action is the Mom Network of Truth. Hello. Have you ever felt like ridiculousness is taking over the internet? That social media is just disaster? Well, we are here together as moms to come help save the day. So we have a link there. You can sign up with Moms Network of Truth. We have lots and lots and lots of actions through that, as well as primary sources and data that you can share. So it's a really great program. So that's it for our program today. Speaking of program, I want to close this by thanking you, each and every one of you who has not given up, each and every one of you who is taking your fury and turning it into change and action. Each and every one of you who knows that this is a marathon and not a sprint and is going to stay involved, and get 5, 10, 20, 15, 1,000 more people involved with you. So the closing action is, please come to a future Zoom and bring 5 friends, bring 10 friends, bring as many friends as you want, because we need everybody to get engaged. And you saw from the polling tonight, even the people who voted for Trump do not support the policies that Trump, Elon Musk, and the Republican leadership are putting forward. So you're not alone, and let's grow the tent for the future. That's our closing action. Thank you to everyone. Good night, and sleep well. Thank you.